Okay, class, we are back. The last lecture we talked about the first of the three of the four groupings of plants. As you recall, the non-vascular plants, the seedless vascular plants, then the gymnosperms, and now we are here at angiosperms, the last grouping, and we're also going to touch a little bit on flowers and fruits. So we got all the way up to the gymnosperms, which had seeds and leaves and roots and vascular systems and all that. But we didn't have fruits yet, flowers and fruits. And now the grouping of angiosperms are characterized by having flowers and fruits, the end all and be all of reproduction in plants. And so that brings us to our last of the four. You have one phylum, surprisingly, in angiosperms called the Anthophytas, but there are then just groupings of the phylum Anthophytas. They're not really broken up into different classes, so we will discuss those and how those are organized. You have basal angiosperms, and there are three lineages of basal angiosperms: the Amborella, the water lilies, and the star anises. You also have then magdalids, and these are the magnolias, the laurels, and the black pepper plants. But where the majority of the groupings of angiosperms are either in monocots or dicots. In monocots and dicots, there are certain characteristics of each of those, and you see that there in the middle as far as the characteristics in which differentiates them into either being monocots or dicots. The defining, as far as the name monocot and dicot, or eudicot, is the cotyledon in the embryos. The monocots have one cotyledon and the eudicots have two. As far as leaf venation, now that's not something you can usually kind of look at unless you have a microscope on hand, but if you're looking at a plant and you look at the leaves, this is very easy to tell a monocot from a dicot. The veins generally are parallel as far as the leaf venation, and in a dicot, you have net-like venation in the leaf. So like grass, you see how they're like parallel to one another. Corn, you look at the leaf and the veins are parallel to one another. That would be a monocot. If you look at the stems, on a monocot, you have vascular tissue, you know, the xylem and the phloem. This is a cross-section of the stem that is scattered, whereas in a dicot, it's in a concentric ring, which we'll see that during lab. The root system is usually fibrous. There's no like main taproot in monocots, whereas dicots usually have a taproot with little roots present off of it. The pollen has one opening in a monocot. The pollen on dicots have three. And then as far as the flowers are concerned, this is something that you can observe too without out in nature, without pulling the plant up or having a microscope. And that is the organs of the plant. Like the petals are usually in multiples of three, whereas dicots are usually in multiples of fours or fives. Now, in alternation of generations in angiosperms, you have the same as far as the gymnosperms, as far as the male gametophytes are contained within the pollen grains. And then the female gametophytes, whoops, my dog just stepped on there we go. Whereas the female, it's okay, Benny. The female gametophytes develop in the ovule. The flower of the sporophyte is composed of both female and male structures. I mean, there are some plants that have male flowers and female flowers, but for our example here, we're just going to kind of do that way. And just like in gametophytes, the male gametophytes are contained within the pollen grains produced by the anthers. That we'll get into the we'll see that in the alternation of generations, in the flower structures that show what anthers are. The microsporangia, again, give rise to microspores, which give rise to male gametophytes. And the female gametophyte, or the embryo sac, develops within an ovule contained within an ovary at the base of the stigma. The myosporangia produce megaspores, which give rise to the female gametophytes. And this again is referred to as heterospory versus homospory, where they're separate male and female gametophytes. So you see there the alternation of generations. There is the flower. I'm kind of up at the top towards the left, like where 11 o'clock would be on the face of a clock. Your flower is diploid. That is the sporophyte. The anther is producing the male gametophyte, which is contained in the pollen grain. And you see that the ovule is producing the female gametophyte, which is in the ovule. And you see that fertilization takes place. The pollen goes down through a pollen tube. The style of that structure, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, and fertilizes those eggs. Fertilization takes place. I'm down here by 6 o'clock on the, down at the bottom of our chart. Fertilization takes place. You have an embryo form, and you have a seed that develops around the embryo. It has a seed coat and endosperm, and the characteristic of these not just having flowers as far as angiosperms is that, and then a fruit develops around that seed to protect that seed even more. And we'll talk about fruits in just a bit. So as far as flowers are concerned, this is the reproductive structure of angiosperms. You have some bits and pieces here. You have, as far as the male part of the flower is composed, or I should say is the stamen. It's composed of the anther and the filament. The female parts we collectively call a pistil, and that is composed of the stigma, which is the top there. It's sticky to collect the pollen, the male gametophyte, the sperm. The style, which is a tube that runs down into the ovary. Pistil is also referred to as a carpel. We have some terminology here in regards to flowers. If we have the stamens and the carpel, we say that it is a perfect flower. If it is a male versus a female, like if you have male flowers and then female flowers that are separate, we say they are imperfect. Monoecious. This is a term given to plants that have separate stamen and carpel producing flowers on the same individual, and dioecious has separate male and female plants. Oh, wow, there's a visual on that. I didn't realize that. Pollination, I'm so sorry, is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Now, this can happen so many different ways. One that's most known is when bees do this. Bees are extremely important in the act of pollination. They're collecting nectar, and so in rubbing up against the pollen grains, they carry the pollen from one flower to another. It sticks to the stigma of that carpel or that pistil, where the pollen tube grows, and then the eggs get fertilized. But you can also have flies, you can have birds, you can have bats that also do this. Then what you have is around the fertilized seed, you have a zygote form, you have a seed that develops, and then you have fruits that develop around that seed to protect it even more, and then also aid in its dispersal. And I think most of us know what fruits are. From a culinary standpoint, you may understand like a cucumber as a vegetable, but actually it's a fruit. When you have a seed-bearing part of the plant, that is the fruit. So pumpkins are fruits, and green peppers are fruits, even though from an eating standpoint, we generally think of fruits as being sweet, but those are all fruits. You have these different adaptations of fruits which can be carried by the wind, they can be carried by the water, they can be carried by animals, like little burrs that get stuck in animals' fur. They can be eaten, digested, and then defecated out. And that's an effective way for seeds to travel from one area to another. A lot of wild scat or wild poop that you see, whether it's bear poop or raccoon poop, you see seeds in it, and it's a seed that passed through the digestive tract of that animal and conveniently got deposited far away from the mother plant and even has some fertilizer attached. So when you think of fruits, yes, all angiosperms have fruits. It just may not be the fruit in which you are accustomed to seeing. And we'll see this in lab, the different types of categories of fruits depending upon what their characteristics are. Whether they're simple, aggregate, multiple. You also have terms like pome and berry and pepo and hesperidium, and compound fruits, aggregates, multiple, as far as like how they develop and from how many flowers they develop as well. Pomes include your apples and your pears. Berries are simple fruits, seeds created from a single ovary. So you have those that are pepos, where the skin is hardened, like cucurbits. You have hesperidiums, where there is a rind and a juicy interior, like citrus fruit. So oranges and grapefruits are hesperidiums, which is a type of berry. Scientifically, you wouldn't say, can you get some berries from the store? And somebody brings home oranges. You wouldn't say those aren't berries, but yes, scientifically they are. Then you have compound fruits. Aggregate fruits are seeds from that different ovaries of a single flower, and multiple fruits are fruits of separate flowers merged or packed closely together. So an example of an aggregate fruit would be like a raspberry, for instance, and a multiple fruit would be a pineapple. So very interesting stuff. You have other types of fruits, those that we, again, like those are fruits that we commonly think of as fruits, but there are some others which maybe perhaps are not as common, like silice, which is shepherd's purse, and otrico, which is the reproductive structure of like a beet, for instance. Samara, those are the maple trees, the little helicopter whirly gigs that fall off maple trees. Certain nuts are actually types of fruits, like acorns are a type of fruit. You have lomans, it's a type of an indehiscent legume. Peas, peanuts, beans are a type of a legume, which is a type of fruit. You have follicle, which is from a single carpel and opens by one suture, like milkweed. You'll see that, hopefully, you'll get to see that in ecology class. A fibrous drupe, all kinds of things, like walnuts and coconuts. Capsella, like a dandelion, that's a type of a fruit. That little thing that you think is just a seed on the end of what floats through the air, that's a type of a fruit. Caryopsis, like wheat and corn. A capsule, like a Brazil nut, and an achene, which is a strawberry. See, there's the berry thing again. You think, oh, I'm going to get myself some berries, and you pick up strawberries. That's an achene, right? Okay, I know. That's just us biologists flexing, I suppose, or whatever the proper term is. I never know what the proper term is. So we'll continue on. Now, as far as fertilization and development, what happens, the way this works is you have a pollen grain, which is the male gametophyte, lands on the stigma. The pollen grain produces a pollen tube that grows down the length of the style to the ovary. So a pollen tube actually then forms from that particular pollen grain. When the pollen tube reaches the micropyle or the pore of the ovule, it enters the female gametophyte and releases 2 sperm cells. One sperm fertilizes the egg to form an embryo, while the other combines with 2 nuclei in the central cell of the female gametophyte and initiates development of food-storing endosperm to nourish the embryo. And this is what we call a seed. So again, you have, we refer to this as double fertilization, is that the 2 sperm cells that are released from the male gametophyte, the pollen, so one fertilizes the egg and the other one goes to form the endosperm, the nutrients that are located within the seed in order for that embryo to grow. It's the energy source for the embryo. This is a bit of a closer up here as far as seeds is concerned. So you have one sperm that fertilizes that egg to form the embryo, and the other combines the two nuclei of the central cell. The female gametophyte initiates development of food-storing endosperm to nourish the embryo, and that is what we refer to as a seed. So as far as, that we have seeds and we have flowers and we have fruits, this is important. So you have the seed. So this is the sporophyte embryo. It has a food supply and it has a protective coat. Now remember with gymnosperms, we said that it has seeds, but we would say they're naked seeds. These seeds have a protective seed coat. As far as seeds are concerned, extremely important, when we're talking about the evolution of plants, because now you have this self-contained unit, not a spore that needs to be carried by water, but it's very, very rigid and very hardy, and they can actually remain dormant for years until the conditions are favorable. Like you have the seed banks that like doomsday seed banks where you have seeds that are stored, millions of different or tens of thousands of different species of plants, where in cold areas of the world like Norway, they have a seed bank where they store these seeds in case these plants go extinct, and then they can like repopulate the planet with that particular plant. Because those seeds will last, years and years and years and years. And you also have this advantage because, again, you don't need water. You can have water to transport a seed, but you can use many different ways of transporting a seed, whether it's by animal or by the wind or otherwise. Fertilization, this is what, so once fertilization occurs, you have that, what we say, a ripened ovary. This is where you then have that fruit develop around the seed. And, you can have like a fleshy fruit, as discussed earlier, to initiate, or I should say attract a pollinator from eating the fruit and then carrying the seeds in their digestive tract and then defecating them out at another time. And this is, last but not least, this is a very good video that goes through this particular process. So that's an overview of angiosperms, flowers, fruits, and seeds. I hope you find that useful. Thank you.